Thank you. You'll be really pleased to know I'm also not going to take my shirt off. You can also find my YouTube channel. It's called Dad Bod, and I love getting hits on it. And if anyone wants a little private showing afterwards, I'll be probably in the toilets or somewhere like that. I also want to echo what Gus said at the beginning. Matthew Hodson was originally going to do this slot. Matthew unfortunately lost his mother last week. And I know I doubt that Matthew is watching, but maybe Matthew at some point will see this. Matthew, we are all of us sending you a huge, huge heap of love. Bless you and all to the rest of your family. Let's join a round of applause for Matthew and his folks. So as Anton said, I am a public health doctor. I'm the co-founder of PrEPster. Sometimes I'm an academic. Mostly I'm an activist and an advocate. I'm a PrEP user. I'm also a really, really proud European. And David said at the start of today he didn't want to say the B word. Well, I'm going to say the B word, folks. It's a really bittersweet moment for those of us from the UK every time we come to one of these events in Europe. I remember 3 years ago at an event with Nicholas, who's at the back in Berlin, that he invited me to go to, and it was just after Brexit happened, and I got off the aeroplane at the airport in Berlin and sat on the bus and cried all the way into Berlin because I was so horrified about the decision our country had made. And if there's one great thing to come out of the complete debacle that we see at the moment is that I think we've started to introduce a new word to the rest of the world. If you don't yet know what a cockwomble is, ask one of the other Europeans, because Boris Johnson is a fucking cockwomble. History shows us, events like this show us of what happens when we come together, what happens when we are not divided and when we are united. And you can probably hear my voice is getting quite emotional. I am deeply, deeply horrified and saddened by what's going on in my country. And I'm sorry and apologize to the rest of you for what we're putting you through. On to better things, and actually because I'm acutely aware of how behind time we're already running, I'm gonna probably cut my presentation by at least a third. What I was asked to present by Gus a week ago was how we might spread the word, how we might spread messaging for PrEP. I was asked to reflect on what might make a good campaign and what might be a good message. I used to be head of health promotion at Terence Higgins Trust, and my colleagues in the marketing and communications team would come to me pretty much on a daily basis and say, Will, a new piece of research has come out. Can you tell us what the message is? And I would also always say, there is no message. The comms people always want a short, snappy quote for the media, and I always fought back with, I can give you one, but it's always going to be complex. Because the message is complex, it's messy, and it's getting more so. The evidence we've heard presented over the last 24 hours will tell us that. And there's a danger in colluding with simple messaging. I'm a big fan of what's been going on around U equals U, but U equals U is only the case if you know how to access HIV treatments, if you can afford them, and if you can take them. There's been an ongoing debate within U equals U activists and movements around the oversimplification of the U equals U messages, and I'm not going to re-rehearse them now, but there's a danger that we can also start to go into the oversimplification of logos like and slogans like PrEP works. Because just like U equals U, PrEP only works if we are able to access it, if we can afford it, if we're able to take it, and if we have few side effects from it. So this is the point when I'm going to skip forward, and I'm really, really sorry, Ingrid Young, who I'm a big fan of, because I was going to present her amazing, amazing model on HIV literacy, but that would have taken 10 minutes of my time. Excuse me. But instead what I'm going to do is, and at the danger of repeating some of the brilliant stuff that's already been said, and thank you, Jose, for your closing remark at the beginning of lunchtime, because you pretty much said in one sentence what I'm now about to say in 5 points, is that if we're thinking about PrEP messaging, if we're thinking about how we communicate PrEP to the world, I think there are 5 key pieces of learning that we can take away. The first is that we already know the answers. I sit in endless meetings with people who say we need more evidence before we can do something. Now, this is a bit of a quandary for me because I'm a researcher and an academic. And researchers and academics never want to pretend we don't already know the answers. Because if you look at the end of almost every single academic journal, the key finding is we need more research. So I'm kind of arguing myself out of part of what my job is, but I actually think we already know. We already know the answers to almost everything we need to know the answers to. The problem is we have a whole barrage of research, but we rarely act upon it. Right here are some key headlines that tell us what we should be doing about better targeting black gay men in the UK around HIV. All of these things are totally pertinent today for everything we could be doing, and Phil touched on them already. We're not doing most of those things, but this isn't new research. This research summary document that's up on the screen in front of you was produced in 1999, 20 years ago. We already have a barrage of evidence and research about what we should do to better target black gay men around PrEP and around HIV prevention. It's been sitting on our shelves for the best part of 20 years. We already have the answers. The last 2 presentations, and a couple of them before lunch, reiterated this point for us. And this is why I dislike the concepts of messaging, because what makes a good campaign? One that is targeted. Have a really quick look at this data. It's from an assessment tool of over 1,000 people in a London outreach project from last year, undertaken with colleagues at Positive East, Metro Charity, and Spectra in West London. Don't spend too much time looking at it, but what you should look at is the white MSM data versus black women. White MSM are 4 times as likely to know about PrEP and 10 times as likely to know a PrEP user. So why would we even begin to think about doing the same types of messaging and campaigns to those groups of people? What we know is that if you are a woman and you live in London, your barrier to accessing PrEP is likely to be knowledge. If you're a gay or bisexual man, your barrier is likely to be cost. So what the message is depends on who we're targeting. I'm going to leave this because Jacina's going to talk about this in a second, but it's a really good example of targeting. Third point, broadcast and social media. Broadcast and social media are the most commonly used communications methods. They're good at getting small pieces of information to large groups of people. They're broadly untargeted, and they're broadly mostly seen by people who are not in the target group. Social media is really, really poor at engaging with people who are the most marginalized. And yet we continue to put millions and millions of pounds worth of dollars and euros into broadcast and social media as if they're the best things we can do. What is good? We've heard a whole set of those examples in the last 24 hours. Outreach, here's our folks, our colleagues at PrEP New in Amsterdam doing outreach, I think in Club Church. Engagement, meeting people in their spaces, just as the last speaker has told us about. I couldn't get away without showing a slide of Greg Owen. Outreach is less visible, it's more expensive, it hits fewer people, but it's way, way, way more effective. Fourthly, our work should be driven by peers. There's increasing evidence that peer education, take-up, works better when it's driven by our peers. Again, a whole barrage of speakers, particularly the last one, has just told us all about that. Kuchenga, who is a black trans PrEP user based in the southwest of England, tells her story about what it's like to be a trans woman who is using PrEP. PrEP New tells stories of what it's like to be a PrEP user. All of these peer-based models are incredibly strong, And if we're not using peers, if peers are not at the front line of what we're doing, then we're doing something wrong. Stories and narratives are engaging. The lived experience of PrEP users are incredibly powerful. And as a quick aside, 5 years ago, there were only 500 gay and bisexual men in England who were using PrEP on the PROUD trial. Right now in England, there are more women using PrEP, cis and transgender women using PrEP in England, than there were gay and bisexual men 5 years ago. How are we going to increase the numbers of women even further? By exactly the same methods that we used in increasing the numbers of gay and bisexual men. That's not through broadcast, that's probably not through social media, it's through word of mouth, it's through peers. It's about those women who are PrEP users telling the women they know, the women they work with, the women they have sex with, the women they share drugs with, the women they went to have abortions with, the women they went to get contraception with, about PrEP themselves. Word of mouth, peer-to-peer, is what's going to change that. And then finally, and slightly controversially, particularly because 2 of my colleagues this morning have partly sung the praises of this, I want to really knock on the head this idea of innovation. Anyone who works in England right now will know that this is a dodgy subject for me to be challenging, given a bunch of us are just waiting to see if we've been successful in Public Health England's Innovation Fund. An innovation fund that funds new projects every single year, again and again and again, but each time it's a new project. Innovation gets us the funding, but it's a cycle that we need to break. There's no point in doing innovation if we don't know that innovation works. So innovation without evaluation, or at least innovation without good reflection, I think is pointless. So I'm partly proposing a new model, one that says innovate, evaluate, replicate, adapt, and then collaborate. We don't need to be reinventing the wheel every single time. We can replicate, we can adopt, and we can adopt to suit our communities, our settings, or our regions. I Want PrEP Now and PrEPster recently ran and produced a set of videos for trans people on PrEP. These were adapted, replicated, and collaborated with a bunch of activists in Japan who, instead of wasting time on reinventing the wheel, have translated and are now, oh, there's you again, Danny, these videos. Someone's taking a photo. I'm not going to move the slide. Good. Very same thing from our colleagues at ED. They took the great piece of work from Chicago's PrEP for Love, translated it, adapted it, replicated, rather than going back to innovation. So if there's one thing I want to leave you with this afternoon, this is an invitation from PrEPster for you out there. If we've done something you like, please replicate it, please adapt it, and please collaborate with us. I have one very final point to make. This is a blatant Marcus plug, there's the word I use. In addition to the work we're doing in PrEPster, we decided that instead of sitting in pointless, roundabout, circuitous meetings, having debates and discussions with academics about the relative contribution that PrEP may or may not have to STIs, instead we were going to stop the silence around STIs. We've just launched a brand new piece of work, PrEPster's sibling project, called A Long Time No Syphilis. There are postcards around. We've just launched a website. It will be available in 4 to 5 or 6 different European languages. And if anyone would like to collaborate with us in other parts of Europe, we would be very happy to do that. Oh, look, Danny got another shot. Danny, you are really... Last slide, I can't go back. Oh, there you are. Thank you, folks.